In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Well, I couldn't pass up the opportunity today to speak about Pope Saint Pius V. One of those pivotal figures in the history of the Church. He was the Pope only for 6 years, so a rather short amount of time considering, but incredible events were happening that could have changed the course of history for like the past 500 years. So he was born in 1504 and died in 1572 and reigned, as I said, for only 6 years. So 1566 to 1572 was his papacy. And that's like smack in the middle of the Protestant Revolution going on there in Europe. Not only that, he was dealing with the Protestant Revolution, which arose because of incredible corruption in the clergy and especially in Rome, right? Some things never change. And then the Turkish invasion, right? He had to deal with the Holy League and Don Juan of Austria putting together that fleet to defeat the invading Turks. So the church is falling apart, the Turks are invading, and the Protestant heresy is raging all over the world, right? And he steps into that. So, as bad as things seem now, they've been, pretty bad in the past also. But anyway, he was at the age of 14, he became a Dominican, so had an early ecclesiastical, life from the earliest times, and he took the name Michael. So his name is Antonio Ghislieri, was his birth name. He takes the Dominican name Michael, ordained a priest at 24, and lectured at a university for 16 years, right? And was also giving polemics against Protestant heresy. Became master of novices, was elected prior in several Dominican houses, and there in the Dominicans, right, even in the monks, he had to fight against lax discipline. He himself was very personally austere and pious, and spent much time in prayer, which he was going to need to deal with like all these external things. You always need a firm internal life of prayer. It's always necessary. Was made a bishop in 1556 and the following year a cardinal, and also named an inquisitor for the Roman Inquisition. And people forget about this. There's the Roman Inquisition and the Spanish Inquisition. Those are two different things, right? Both the same goal, which is to investigate heresy. I mean, I could go on about the Inquisition. That is like one of the most misunderstood institutions of the church, along with the Crusades. And typically, anytime you see something in the church blamed, like for being terrible, it's usually the opposite. Like the Inquisition is what gave us, these days, due process of law. All kinds of things. Regular criminals in prisons would try to find, they would commit blasphemy or commit some kind of canonical crime that would transfer them to an Inquisition prison because they were treated much better in the prisons of the Inquisition. The Inquisition was what prevented people from being wrongfully accused and imprisoned or put to death without a trial. The Roman Inquisition would go in and people would be accused of heresy. The Inquisition was the one that said, okay, stop, let's make sure there's actually heresy and not something else going on. The Inquisition is instituted what's called, double jeopardy. You couldn't be tried for the same crime twice. It was also, they would look for, I can't remember the term, but if somebody in a particular place had an interest in a person being convicted, they could not testify. If there was two blacksmiths in the town, and the one blacksmith was accused of heresy, the other blacksmith could not testify against him because he had something to gain. So it was very fair in how they wanted to make sure that only exactly the truth was discovered. So anyways, and what we see is the Roman Inquisition and the Spanish Inquisition, like I said, two different institutions. Pius V, the Dominican, right, Michael, was named Inquisitor in the Roman Inquisition and defended the Archbishop of Toledo, which is in Spain, against accusation of heresy by the Spanish Inquisition. So you've got the Spanish Inquisition accusing one of their own cardinals, and the Roman Inquisition comes in and clears him of it. So you've got intrigues going on, and it's like a check and balance. Let's see. Okay. He was reprimanded by that, by Paul IV, who was the Pope at the time. So he did his job even against, the Pope didn't like it. He's like, look, I'm just doing my job. The next Pope, Pius IV, frequently called him to Rome for just affairs of state and of the church. And the future Pius V displayed unflinching zeal in all questions on which he was consulted, which caused trouble when Pope Pius IV wanted to make his 13-year-old nephew a cardinal, right? Nepotism. Pope Pius, the future Pius V reprimanded Pius IV for that and said, absolutely not. That's a terrible decision. That's nepotism. It's an abuse of power, et cetera, et cetera. So Pius IV dismisses him from his service, like tells him to get out. So Michael Ghislieri, as he is, the Dominican, begins packing up to return to his diocese. He's done there at Rome. The Pope wants nothing to do with him. When suddenly the Pope unexpectedly dies. And the future Pius V starts getting a lot of support to be the next Pope. And indeed he is. He's elected as Pope unexpectedly against all odds. Here he was just told to get out of Rome. The Pope is done with you. And against all odds, he becomes Pope. Like completely unexpected. They couldn't have thought that would happen. So what does he do? He wasn't in favor with Pius IV. He had been sent packing from Rome by Pius IV. There was, I'm sure, a faction of cardinals who were very much in favor of what Pius IV was doing, and what this new Dominican did not want to do. So, in a move of high-level diplomacy, he takes the name Pius V in honor of his predecessor. Right? That was a very shrewd move, which marks people that are able to do that, operate at high-level politics. So he sets about reforming the church there, the ecclesiastics in Rome. He insists upon clerical discipline. The Council of Trent is wrapping up; is in session. He begins instituting the reforms of the Council of Trent. He actually, at some point, I don't know where in the papacy, he excommunicates Elizabeth I of England and declares her subjects absolved of obeying her, trying to stem the tide of Protestantism. And among other things, right, he organizes the Holy League to fight against the Turks, and he standardized the Mass. He promulgates the 1570 edition of the Roman Missal, which is a Mass that we still say basically today, the Tridentine Mass. That's why it's called that. So it was Pius V that did all that. So it's really incredible, and that was part of his efforts at liturgical reform. Recall that in early 1500s, Martin Luther had visited Rome when he was still a Catholic, and said that the liturgy at Rome could be compared to a juggling act. It was just, people didn't know what was going on. It was a disaster. So Pius V walks into all of this, and he accomplishes so much in that short span of 6 years. Forms the Holy League against the Ottoman Empire, wins that Battle of Lepanto, and then he popularizes the Rosary as a result. As we know, the Rosary became very popular because of Pius V. It's said that on the day of the battle, 7 October, he was sitting down in his papal apartments, and he goes and he walks out to the window, and then he has miraculous knowledge that battle was victorious. And so he declares an immediate cease to all business in Rome, has the bells ring, and declares everybody needs to celebrate the great victory over the Ottoman Turks. And then it was through Our Lady of, it was through the Rosary that he attributed that victory. He had people praying the Rosary all over Rome. And so he, in fact, instituted the Feast of Our Lady of Victory, or Our Lady of the Rosary, on October 7th, in thanksgiving for that victory over the invading Turks. So we have him to thank for the widespread popularity of the Rosary as we know it today, and also for wearing white. Dominicans, their habit is white, and he didn't stop wearing that as Pope. So the reason the popes wear white is because of Pius V, right? He started that tradition of the white robes of the Pope. And that victory over the Turks was, Europe was on the verge of complete, invasion. The reason that people still speak German and French is because of Pius V. they would always been becoming Muslim a lot sooner than they are now, right? But it's kind of a different invasion these days. But it was incredible, like what he did, and it was at a time when Europe was fractured. He couldn't pull together, as they had in the past, a united army against the Turks because they were all fighting themselves. Even Catholics that wanted to help were busy staving off the Protestants, in their own lands. Everything, it was like a civil war. So he did all of this, like I said, in just 6 short years of the papacy. But he had they would say that charity of Christ. I think it was Cardinal John Henry Newman said that Pius V was stern and severe, as far as a heart burning and melted with divine love could be so, yet with such energy and vigor as were necessary for the times. He was a soldier of Christ in a time of insurrection and rebellion, when in a spiritual sense martial law had been proclaimed. And that really was, the 1500s was the century that saw the dissolution of Christendom, and then the 1500s, and then the 1600s, which saw the rise of secularism that we're now still living in. But he was raised up by God, at a time when it was needed, and as I said, he became Pope when it seemed against all odds. So let's not forget that. I would say he was elected Pope by the timely death of his predecessor, and God is the author of life and death, right? It's been said many times, a famous kind of saying, there's no problem in the church that can't be solved by a few good funerals, right? And sometimes that's what's necessary, right? It's a sad state of the church, but God sends the Pope that the church deserves and needs. And what the church needs is to understand doctrine. What do you do when you have a bad Pope that is suspect of heresy? How should the church respond to that? We'll know in a few decades or so. It's not up to us now to worry about it. That's going to be a future Pope. But problems in the church can be solved by timely deaths. And God could end all of this. God could completely turn the church around if he so wanted. He's the author of everything. So we have to be patient and realize he is in control, as he said to his apostles as he ascended, which the ascension is this Thursday. All power in heaven and earth is given unto me. Do we believe that or not? Do we remember that or don't we? All power is given to God. He could end this. He's not ending it. There's something the church still needs to learn from. The future Pius V, whatever, that could happen. That could happen in an instant. So we have to be patient and wait. This is God's plan, not ours. In the meantime, this is why it's important to know our history. Yes, everybody, thinks of Pius V as a great pope. Why was he such a great pope? Because the church was in such bad state when he entered into it. Right? That's what made him his abilities able to shine. The church was not in a good state. It was a disaster, and he pulled it out of it. So that's how you're going to know those saints that God raises up. When times are the worst, that's when the saints shine the most. Right? So that's what we need to be praying for and waiting patiently for. Not our time, God's time. So let's ask for the intercession of the saints, especially Pope Saint Pius V, that we might have. Right, a good future pope coming in to do for the church what he did in his time. So may God bless you all. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.